Hi everyone, this is Kirsten Davis here at Stetson University College of Law. Pleased to have you all with us today. If you can hear me and you see your little question box, can someone go ahead and just let me know that you can hear me out there? Great. Thank you, everyone. Glad you can hear me okay. And good to have you with us today for our Empirical and Statistical Studies in Legal Writing webinar. We're excited to have a great group of panelists with us today. And here I am, your organizer. I'm not your moderator for today, so you're not going to listen to me talk for very long. But I am the organizer trying to run all the behind-the-scenes stuff. For those of you who haven't been with us before, I just want to give you a quick tour of the interface that you're going to see today. Typically on the left-hand side of your screen is the window where you can see my screen, and that's me moving the mouse around. And then on the other side is your control panel. So viewer window and the control panel. On the control panel are some neat features for you, but they're pretty simple to use. One is that little arrow key that lets you open and close that control panel to move it out of the way if you need to. So you just click on it and it closes, and you click on it again and it opens right back up. So that's how you would use that. And I think we're just catching up here with the screen. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing. And then you have the audio setup button. So if you're having any trouble hearing me at all, or any trouble, you can always go to the telephone and call in if your speakers aren't working, but that's the audio setup button where you can check your audio. The questions log are where we can see questions from you, and we really do want your questions. So you would type your questions into that box and I will get them to the right speaker. And then finally up here is, if you do the little on the pull-down menu, the view button, right here it says to auto-hide the control panel. If you don't want it to accidentally close up on you, uncheck that little box and it'll stay open. Or if you'd rather it hide itself, that's okay too, and you can always use that little arrow key to get right back on. Okay, so just to make sure, I think we've already seen that the question and answer box is working, but I want to ask this question anyway. So today's question, just to make sure that box is working, is to tell me what's the best museum in the city you're living in right now. And that'll make sure everybody can hear us, and maybe I'll share a few with the group and then we'll get going. Here we go. Okay, the Cartoon Art Museum, Ray says, which I don't know where that is. Michael says the Brower Art Museum, wherever he is. Science and Industry, Maryland offers. George says the Arkansas Art Center in Little Rock. Amy says the North Carolina Museum of Art. Someone says there aren't any museums where they are. Great. And the Philadelphia Museum of Art from Ellie. So thank you, everyone. That's really helpful. I can see that everything's working pretty well for us. Just as a reminder, the webinars are still available for replay, all of the ones that we've already done, in our Advocacy Resource Center. And if you want to take a screenshot of the screen, you can. But also in an email that comes to you after this webinar, we will have that information for you in that email. So, and anytime you want to get the old webinars or send a colleague to it, they're free and available for you there. Our upcoming webinar in November, we don't quite have a date specific set for that, but we're really excited. Jason Palmer and Linda Anderson here are putting together a webinar on diversity in the legal writing classroom, moving toward more inclusiveness. And we're excited about this because we know that the second draft is also getting ready to publish a great newsletter on that topic. So look for that announcement coming up soon. And now it's my time to turn it over to your moderator for the day, who is Lance Long. He is an associate professor of legal skills here at Stetson, my colleague, who has done a lot of wonderful work on empirical and statistical studies in legal writing. And so I'm going to turn it over to Lance. Lance, you are currently ready to go, and I'm going to change the screen to you. Is that good?
All right, it's good except for now I can show my screen here.
Great.
Okay.
Yes, we can see that screen waiting on your PowerPoint.
There it is. Good afternoon again, everyone, and welcome again to Stetson's Virtual Legal Writing Conference on Empirical and Statistical Studies in Legal Writing. I am your moderator, as Kirsten said, Lance Long. I'm an associate professor of legal skills here at Stetson in sunny Gulfport, Florida. And we've assembled today what I believe is one of the finest panels for any of you interested in either starting your own empirical studies, or for those of you who are just thinking about starting. This will give you a lot of information and some direction on where to go, or maybe even those of you who are doing statistical analyses or empirical work and just want an additional perspective. We really have put together a fine panel, and whatever your interest, thank you for attending the webinar today. Before I introduce our panelists, I want to exercise my moderatorial prerogative and introduce the topic by way of discussing my background and how I became interested in empirical work and legal studies. I guess it all started back at the 2006 AALS conference in DC. I don't know if you were there, but if you were, I hope, like me, you found it fascinating. I just really enjoyed the empirical work that people had done in the law, and even more so, I think I was really intrigued by the cross-disciplinary empirical work that people had done that related to law. And I got to thinking, you know, how does this apply to legal writing? And I wonder, I'm really curious about the kind of empirical studies that have been done on legal writing, and do they really support what I teach to my students every day? And then shortly after that conference, I found the book Freakonomics and read Freakonomics, and of course became fascinated with the concept of using statistical analysis, economic analysis to everyday problems, and I became all the more convinced that I should do this with legal writing. And I started thinking about what I could do. By the way, Super Freakonomics didn't like it as well. I don't know what your take on it is. I was a little disappointed. It doesn't live up to the original. But anyway, thinking about this, one day, actually, let me go back. Thinking about this, I was reading Richard Newman's text for preparing for class, and he said there's something about you shouldn't use words like clearly and obviously because they can actually hurt your argument, because judges assume that expressions like these are used to cover up a lack of logical proof. And I asked myself, is that true? People don't think you mean it's clear when you say clearly? Has anyone studied that? And I ran into Richard at a conference just a little while later, and I asked him that. I said, you know, is there something you're basing that claim on? And he looked at me and kind of laughed and said, no, I probably just made it up. But he was kidding. I know he had some basis for it, but I was unable to find any study or anything that had even addressed anything remotely similar to that, whether these claims about writing usages or language patterns, whether they actually had the effect that people claim they had. And so that spawned my initial article and foray into empirical studies, and led to 2 published articles and another article in a book, all on empirical studies that address whether language patterns can affect the efficacy of an appellate brief. But I'm not going to talk about my article today, but I just point out that I was fascinated with how little legal research has really been done, or how much empirical work has really been done in legal writing, and especially in light of the fascination with empirical studies that we see in the popular media today. Every other day, the New York Times is reporting some study, and I'm sure you all have, well, maybe not, but the one here on the left of my screen, to really learn, quit studying and take a test, is a recent example I read that when that came out, the underlying study, and was fascinated and realized I shouldn't be doing elaborative in-class exercises and elaborative learning of my methods for my students. All I need to do is just give them a ton of quizzes and tests, and it's more effective. At least that's what this particular study claims. And I must admit, I have kind of started giving a few more quizzes in class based upon the findings of this study. It's a great study, but you know, why, I thought, are we not doing more of this in legal writing? And maybe it's just because we need to learn a little bit more about it and focus a little more on it. And that's kind of what we want to do today. How do we get on this empirical bus that is hurtling down the highway? This will help you jump on this bus. And the questions we're addressing on the right of my screen are, you know, basically, what is empirical scholarship and how does one do this empirical scholarship? What about statistics? I took an intro to statistics class as an undergrad, but isn't that scary? How do I handle that? Can I really do this? These are the questions we're going to answer today. And so with no further ado, let me introduce today's panelists and basically walk through how they're going to address these topics. Today we have, first of all, Robin Boyle, who is the Assistant Dean for Academic Success and a Professor of Legal Writing at St. John's University School of Law. And she has worked together with our next presenter, Dr. Joanne Ingham, who is the Assistant Vice President for Institutional Research at New York Law School. And together with Professor Boyle, they have actually written and done presentations on this exact topic. How do you do empirical scholarship? And they are probably the experts in this field. So we're very privileged and happy to have them as part of our panel today. And they are going to answer those first two questions. What is empirical scholarship and how do you do it? Third on our panelist list, we have Dr. William Christensen. He's a professor in the Department of Statistics at Brigham Young University and is the lone panelist not affiliated with a law school. Even though he's not affiliated with a law school, he has, however, worked with law professors in providing outstanding statistical analysis. And the reason I know this is because he did the statistics for all three of the articles we have written that apply regression analysis to the legal writing questions that we ask in those articles. Anyway, he's going to talk about you know when and if you need statistical analysis in your empirical work, as well as when and how to associate with a statistician if you feel that you do need statistical analysis. And he has a very, very helpful presentation on that that might make you feel more comfortable about approaching a statistician and which ones to approach. You can't have William. I already got dibs on him. Anyway, last and certainly not least is my colleague Catherine Cameron, who is a professor of legal skills at Stetson here. And she, as well as me, are examples of how seemingly ordinary legal writing professors can become masters, well, at least she's a master of empirical scholarship. I'm still kind of a fledgling novice, but I'm getting the hang of it. She will talk about how you can really actually do this, giving as an example an empirical piece that she has done. So without any further delay, and I will welcome all of our panelists and welcome all of you to them. And just note that after the panelists finish their presentations, I will be collecting the questions from Professor Davis, and we want to have about 15 minutes at the end to ask questions to the panelists. When you type them in, she will get them to me, and I will ask them to the panelists, and they will respond. So that's the format we will take today, and without any further ado, I'll turn the time over to Professor Boyle and Dr. Ingham, who are going to jointly present their presentation today.
Well, thank you very much, Lance. This is Robin Boyle. I will start by introducing three of the studies that I've worked on, and Dr. Joanne Ingham will be showing the slideshow, and she and I together will have comments about our slides. So I will start with discussing three of the studies. I thought that they would be of interest in terms of topic and design to our listeners. They differ in some ways from each other in terms of design and in some ways in terms of topic. So I thought I would just take a few minutes to describe each of those, and then we'll turn to the how-tos, how to conduct empirical research. With the first study, it is published, by the way, we have, Joanne and I have a slide at the end of our slideshow that has a short bibliography, and these studies are referred to there. The first one that I'm going to describe, it was published in the Journal of the Legal Writing Institute. It's called Providing Structure to Law Students, Introducing the Program Learning Sequence as an Instructional Tool. I was very fortunate in having a doctoral student in the education school at St. John's University walk into my office, her name was Linda Lay, and say, I want to write my dissertation, I want to conduct an empirical study, may I engage you and your students to do this? So this was a gift that walked into my office and presented herself to me. So I took advantage of the opportunity. We developed what was called a program learning sequence, aka PLS. I decided that to study the legal research and writing students, an easy way to design a study would be on the topic of legal research. Our study population consisted of over 110 first-year legal research and writing students. We had 2 professors. I was one of the professors. We engaged another professor. We had 4 sections involved. It involved writing. I sat shoulder to shoulder with now Dr. Linda Lay, and we wrote 2 of these PLS manuals, one focused on primary authority, the other on secondary authority. And the PLS manuals were written to appeal to students who had a strong preference for structured and textual materials. Now, in all of the studies that I've done, I had my student populations take their learning style assessment based upon the done and done model. So our students took their learning style assessment, and they were strong in the categories that they strongly preferred structured and textual materials, which this PLS would reach. So the PLS was designed to teach legal research over a 2-week period. We ran the study in the 4 legal writing classes. We had 2 classes as a control group in the first week, with 2 classes serving as the experimental group, and then we flipped them. The following week, we used the different manual, and we used that for the former control group, and the other group became the control. Then we noted with our results that this particular exercise, the innovative teaching tool, was statistically significant in that the students learn the material better by using the PLS than by the traditional instruction that was delivered during the control groups. We had a team of statisticians who went through the data. In the second empirical study that I worked on, I had a second gift. I had a student, Karen Russo, who walked into my office and gave me the same offer. She was a doctoral student at St. John's University Education School. Together we developed something different than the PLS. It was called the Contract Activity Package, aka CAP. The CAP differs from the PLS in that it allows for individualized choices of exercises and is less structured than the PLS. We ran a pilot study. We did not run the pilot in the PLS study, so we ran a pilot. We did not have 4 sections of legal writing. We had 2. And we taught 1 section the traditional way, which was called the control group, and we taught the other section in this experimental way using this non-traditional CAP. That was our experimental group. And we pre-tested and both tested the groups. In the third study, Dr. Joanne Ingham and I examined the learning styles of Generation X law students who attended 3 law schools in New York State. We also contrasted the students' learning styles with the learning styles of their professors. The number of people in this study was much higher than in the prior 2 studies that I mentioned. There were 1,500 law students and 73 faculty members in this study. We published our article in the Journal of Legal Education that describes that study and the results. So Dr. Ingham and I also published in Perspectives a step-by-step guide as to how to conduct empirical research, and she and I are going to go through those steps right now. Go ahead, Joanne.
Good afternoon. What a pleasure to be here. If you ever get a chance to know me, I'm a list maker, and I am neurotically organized. And so for this segment, Robin and I will be reviewing the 7 action steps on our empirical research checklist. I want to really emphasize that conducting a research study is highly structured, and it's a process designed to answer a research question in a way that produces good results. And I really want to emphasize that a well-done study will produce good information, and that's the goal. So paying attention to the process and going through the checklist will help ensure that your results are good, that they're usable, that you want to share them and talk about them. First, your research begins with a question. I would discourage you from just gathering data and then at a later point trying to determine what the question is. It really doesn't work well that way. How do you find a question? Questions emerge. In my own classroom, I find that I observe students that typically have trouble with one concept or another. So why do my students always have a hard time with a specific concept? A question can also emerge when you learn that other faculty members are concerned about similar issues. I mean, in the past few years, we've seen a number of studies examining whether or not computers used in the classroom are helping or hindering learning. So it may be, you know, your colleagues sitting around lunch have similar concerns as you. A question may also emerge when you read a research study conducted by others. Currently at New York Law School, we're replicating a study with legal writing students that was originally conducted with day students, and we're replicating that same study with our evening student population to see if our results are similar or different. Typically, the research question is a key pin, and if you find that the research question is stated too broadly or too narrowly, you're going to have a difficult time determining a focus for your study. You'll find that it's difficult to get going. Stating your question clearly is a critical first step, and there are 2 examples on the screen at this point, one with respect to a classroom study and another with an interinstitutional study. So what is your question, and the degree to which it is important to you, that you're interested in it and passionate about it, makes the process fun.
Okay, this is Robin. I wanted to give an example of how I described the research question in the article on the PLS study. It was stated as such: whether the students had achieved higher scores on the post-test in relation to their pre-test by using the innovative teaching tool versus the traditional instruction.
The next step or checklist on the checklist is to explain the rationale for the study, articulate the reasons why the study needs to be conducted or should be conducted, or why you want to conduct it. You know, research consumes a significant investment of time and energy and resources, and often to accomplish it, you really need to persuade others that this research project is worth doing. Start by checking the literature. Do a literature search. If there are no other studies on point, hooray, you'll have an opportunity to be a pioneer of sorts. If similar studies have been conducted, you can replicate a good study, emphasis on good study, with a different twist to contribute to a body of knowledge. So replicating a study conducted by others is a very legitimate, useful direction to head in. It's not considered less valuable. If you articulate the potential benefits up front, it will be much easier to build a support base and secure the resources that you need. And at a minimum, you're going to want the support from your dean or department chair and the institutional review board at your institution.
Our study questions became part of the introduction to our articles. And when journals decide whether to accept manuscripts, they often consider whether the study adds anything new to the field. So it's important at the outset of your study to articulate the rationale for purposes of the study, but also for the future, because hopefully you will want to publish the results and it will become the introduction to your article. So for the PLS study, for example, this is what was stated at the outset of the article: whether the application of learning styles theory actually improved student learning. And for the CAP study, the intro went like this: the goal was to compare the effectiveness of the CAP with the traditional method of teaching legal research. And for the generational study that Joanne and I performed, we had a 2-sentence explanation of the rationale. It went like this: we embarked upon an empirical study of a large population of law students because of the predominant teaching methodology in the classroom. Despite the diversity of learning style in the student populations, law professors continue to use predominantly auditory instruction in the classroom. And then later on, we went on to refute why predominantly auditory instruction in the classroom is not helpful for the diverse learning styles of our students.
Next step is to prepare a formal proposal. And from my perspective, a well-written formal proposal is absolutely critical. It not only helps me think through the entire process from beginning to end, but it also helps me identify where I need help and support. And researchers seldom work in isolation, and at every point along the way, bring in colleagues for help, support, and their helpful opinions. So your proposal is going to serve as the outline of your study, and this outline will really help you get organized. Second, though, it's really expected that you have a proposal to share with others at your institution in terms of the institutional review board, the dean, seeking budgetary support for your project. This formal proposal will later serve as the outline for an article that you may want to write. This is also a wonderful place and time to involve a statistician. whether you seek the resources of someone in a social sciences department or an education department. If you anticipate that you'll want support in this area, this is the time to identify a colleague that will help you with this. Last, in an ideal situation, and again ideal, conduct a pilot study, as Robin mentioned earlier. A trial run really helps refine the process so that problems are less likely to occur when you conduct the actual study.
Those were very good tips, Joanne. This is Robin. There are a couple of ways to involve a statistician. In a couple of the studies where I've been engaged, we had a dissertation committee, so a statistician was appointed to the committee. On another study, I've hired statisticians from the outside and paid them for their assistance. In another situation, I've engaged statisticians such as Joanne to work with me on a study, and together we published our findings. But I strongly encourage you to find someone who can facilitate both the design of a study as well as work with the data at the end of your study. A couple of other points on this slide. One of the things we ran into when Lynn Dolay and I developed the PLS manuals was that we needed a panel of experts to compare the two manuals to see if they were comparable to each other in terms of level of difficulty. And we needed to create two distinct panel of experts. One was in the field of education and one was in the field of legal research and writing. So when you start going down the empirical study route, it may be that you need to develop some panels depending upon what it is you're studying. In addition, in the PLS study, Lynn Dolay decided that she wanted to hire a graphics expert to design the instructional manuals so that they were really of excellent design. And she invested her own money into this, but we had to work with the artist schedule and the classroom syllabi to coordinate those projects. So number 3 is important in planning ahead with your timeline. Also, a tidbit of information, you will likely be seeking IRB approval. When you get to the point of publishing your findings, we recommend that you list somewhere in your article, either in text or in footnote, that you did seek and receive IRB approval, because sometimes people will read your article looking for that piece of information.
Okay. Before the study begins, you really must be prepared. Prepare your materials in advance and double check them. Coordinate with the staff who will be helping you at a point when the study is conducted, and stick to a strict timeline. I like to think of COPE, C-O-P-E, communicate, organize, prepare, and execute. The process should go like a well-oiled machine. It really has to run very smoothly. You don't want any errors at this point. And then make sure you think about where the materials or the data or surveys are going to be stored centrally, and mark each with respect to who collected it, what they collected, where they collected it, and when. Be a detail fanatic. Further, you must have a process for introducing the participants to the study. Communicate that the information you're gathering is confidential, that no matter what they share with you or write, no individual information will be shared. Students and staff have to know that their participation is voluntary and that their grades will not be impacted, nor will their professional evaluation be impacted. I think talking about the positive outcomes of participation is really a good way to go in terms of being persuasive. And very often the IRB will have very specific opinions on the informed consent procedures.
You will likely be showing a draft of your consent release form to the IRB to get their input. And my suggestion is carefully craft your release so that it informs the subjects what the study is about, but it doesn't taint the outcome of the study.
Okay, now let's collect the data. Answers to this list of questions regarding the data must be provided at the onset. So anticipate that you've got to figure out a system and a response to these questions in advance of the study. If you're going to collect numerical or quantitative data, how will you gather it? How will you store it? And where will you store it? If you're going to gather textual or qualitative data, how will you code it? Once you have the data, you have to have a plan for how you're going to organize it so you can analyze it appropriately. This step is important because the type of data that you collect will determine the type of statistical procedures you can run. So involve a statistician clearly at this point. Who will run your stats? Will you be using Excel? Will you be using a statistical package for the social sciences like SPSS? Find resources to help you do this. Find resources that have access to these programs so that you can run your data. Is there someone who is very skilled at preparing tables and graphs for you so that your data are presented graphically as well as in tables? And as you prepare your report, think about who will be seeing the results. Think about your audience, and that will help you to set the right tone.
Depending upon the intended audience, the results could be written in layperson's terms, or they could remain in the technical terms with the statistical jargon included. And that depends upon whether you're submitting a written article, let's say, to the Journal of Legal Writing Institute, or whether it's going to the education field.
And then you're at a point where you're going to answer clearly your question. What have you learned from your studies? And be prepared to share the findings with a variety of constituents. Robin and I presented our multi-school research study results with the faculty at each institution, the students in their classrooms, and at a conference, and they were published.
I highly recommend sharing your study details and findings at future academic conferences. I've learned so much at conferences from my fellow colleagues.
Good.
And that concludes our presentation.
All right, let's thank Robin and Joanne. I already have some good questions for you from our attendees. But let's move right into William Christensen, and let's hear what he has to say. Robin and Joanne think that it's good to involve a statistician early. What do you think, Dr. Christensen?
Dr. Christensen, are you with us? I can see your slides coming up, but can't hear you. Lance, are you hearing Dr. Christensen?
I am not hearing Dr. Christensen, and he has such a nice voice, too, so I hope we can figure out how we can hear him.
Well, maybe while he gets his his unmute button is gone. Okay, let me try this again. How about now, William?
Okay, are you hearing me now?
We sure are. There you
hear me
go.
now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. All right. Well, my name is William Christensen. I'm a professor in the Department of Statistics here at BYU, and just going to share a couple of thoughts today about my perspective on quantitative research in legal writing. I've done a little bit of work with Lance Long, as Lance mentioned, and just thought I'd share a couple of thoughts. So here's a couple of things I'd like to discuss today. One, statisticians, what is our role? And often you could add criminals there too, but I'm going to focus on collaborators and cops, and the way that we interact with you as legal scholars depend on a few ways that you incorporate us and at what point. I'll talk a little bit about populations, what they are, and how we make inferences to different populations, what it means to make a statistical inference. And then if there's a moment at the end there, I'll talk a little bit about structure in your data, the structure in your experimental or observational factors, and structure in your material. So first of all, why work with a statistician? Well, first of all, statisticians are trained to think critically in a wide variety of fields. In fact, you could argue that we're somewhat varied in our interest, or even intellectually schizophrenic. So it can be helpful to work with a statistician because we do tend to be interested in applications in a wide variety of areas.
William, I think we might be having some trouble with your audio. Lance, are you hearing that too?
Yes, I'm hearing some strange sounds.
Okay.
So if William can turn off his speakers or something, that would be great.
Mark keeps saying I should sing while we're trying to work this out with William.
And not only that, the punchline. Statisticians are so charming. We missed it. I love that part.
Well, what I think we might do is while William is working things out, and he can let me know when they are, when he thinks they are, then we'll go ahead and let Catherine Lance give us a little bit of insight about her project.
That sounds like a great idea. Then we'll get back to Dr. Christensen. Excellent. Catherine, let's hear how the ordinary legal writing professor becomes master empiricist.
I'm here, but I don't have the thing that lets me take control of the screen yet. Here we go. All right. Is everybody seeing my screen? Can everybody hear me?
Oh, yeah, it's there.
There you go. You're all set.
All right. Well, I was asked to come here and talk. It's a little intimidating, of course, to be with statisticians because what I came here to talk to you about today was a very small empirical study that a colleague and I did, Jeff Minetti, at Stetson. And it wasn't a big study. We didn't have statisticians involved, but it was a very small study that we did mostly for our own education. And we learned a lot from it, and it was a great way to get started with empirical research, so I thought sharing it with those of you who may be new to doing this would be helpful. So just to give you an idea of where the idea came from, Jeff had collected some surveys from incoming students where they were asked questions as part of the Building Excellence Learning Style Survey. Some of you may be familiar with that. And that survey seeks to ferret out the learning styles of the people that take it. And so Jeff had given that survey to some incoming students, and he collected data from it and had a pretty good idea of the types of learning styles that were present in the first semester students on this particular year. It happened to be 2008. And we started thinking about those preferences and if there might be some way we could use that to our advantage in teaching. So we knew about the Stetson Spring 2008 class that they had certain preferences from this data we collected, or that Jeff had collected. We knew that they tended to be a group that preferred auditory learning, visual learning, talking about content that they were trying to learn, that they preferred working alone or in pairs but didn't like group work. They didn't like small or large groups. They seemed to perceive themselves as being analytic, which means that they were focused on, they preferred to learn information by focusing on the details, not the big picture. Although some of their answers to questions indicated that we did have a good portion of the class that was, they were more global thinkers. So they did actually prefer to focus on the big picture instead of the details. And then we knew we had a significant group of folks in that class that preferred kinesthetic learning, which is learning through doing, actually doing an activity and learning from that. And so based on that, we started thinking about how we could use that information that we knew about the class to our advantage. And we decided that we should design a class and try out some exercises that tried to reach those types of learners that we knew were present in the class and just see how it went. And we didn't have any designs on creating anything big here. It was mostly for our own education and to see how we could use this to our advantage. So we came up with a topic. We decided we were going to teach a pretty benign topic sentences, to these students. We happened to do it mid-semester just because we came up with this mid-semester. And we mostly wanted to make sure that the students could effectively draft a topic sentence for an objective piece. That's what they do at Stetson in their first semester. So we wanted to make sure that they could draft topic sentences for case descriptions or argument paragraphs in an objective piece. So from there, we thought, well, we better come up with some actual skills we want to teach them. That's a pretty broad statement to teach them topic sentences. So we wanted to come up with some actual skills, very specific skills we wanted to teach them. And then from there, we wanted to connect what we knew about their learning preferences to those skills. So the skills we came up with were these 5. We wanted the students to understand the unique function that topic sentences play in a paragraph structure. We wanted them to be able to select the best topic sentence from a list of possibilities, to know the attributes of well-constructed topic sentences, to be able to pick a topic sentence out from other sentences in a paragraph, and to draft to draft well-constructed topic sentences at the end of the day. So we took the data that we had from the BE survey and those skills that we wanted to teach them, and we tried to pair them up. And in order to do that, we found that we had to divorce ourselves from the way we normally teach topic sentences, because at that point, Jeff and I had been both teaching for 4 or 5 years apiece, and so we had a particular class we tended to teach when we were teaching topic sentences, and we had to let that go. And we had to start from scratch and build exercises that tried to reach those specific learning types that we knew we had in the class. And so we did that. We created various exercises. One in particular we created was for the kinesthetic learners. We took a paragraph and we actually physically cut the sentences apart and had strips of paper with each sentence on it, and then asked the students to piece the paragraph back together, which we thought was a great kinesthetic learning activity. So we ran various activities with the students in the class, and then we polled them at the end to ask them which exercises they liked the best. And this is the slide that we asked them about, and I'm not real sure why my graph is suddenly not showing up here, but I did have a graph of answers a few moments ago. And we asked them which exercises they found most helpful. And of the exercises we ran, which are these 7 that were listed here, if you're interested, they liked that paragraph puzzle the best, which was the exercise we designed to catch kinesthetic learners. Oh, there it is. There's the graph. So you'll see there in the middle, they liked the paragraph puzzle the most. We kind of expected that because we knew we had a good portion of kinesthetic learners. Then they liked some of the more visual and auditory things we did. And interestingly enough, they did like the whole class discussions, despite the fact that they had indicated on their BE surveys that they were very individualized people who didn't like to work in groups, but didn't seem to like the opportunity to work with others when we gave them an opportunity to work with peers. So that was our little data set that we got, and it wasn't a very big one, but from that we felt pretty confident that the exercises we had given them and the answers that they gave in response showed us, at least to our satisfaction, that that the students were preferring the exercises that seemed to ring true with what we knew about their learning styles. And although not statistically significant, it gave us some confidence that what we were doing was on the right track, and certainly made us think about doing a bigger study that was actually statistically sound. And in particular, they really liked the puzzle exercise, which we knew conformed with the fact that there were a lot of kinesthetic learners. But the really valuable thing that we got from this little empirical study was that we noticed this interesting inconsistency. On their BE surveys, the students had indicated that they were loners, that they didn't like to work in big groups, that they really preferred to work alone, maybe with one person, but never in a group. And then we had responses that indicated that they did like it when we asked questions of the group as a whole and allowed for whole class discussions. So we asked them why that was. We weren't really prepared for that, so we just had to ask them on the fly. And they told us anecdotally that working in a group made them feel more comfortable in being fearful of being called on individually. They were scared that they would be called on individually, and listening to group responses made them feel more comfortable about their own assessment in case they did get called on. And so it got us thinking about that inconsistency and why that is, and started us thinking that maybe students come in with a particular learning preference and the pressures of law school might cause them to develop a different one, and that there may be a study there about whether that is a good thing or a bad thing, something we want to foster or we don't. So with the little study that we actually conducted, we were able to write an article and put together an LWI presentation. We joined up with Robin Boyle, who's also on this panel, and wrote an article in tandem with her, and did the LWI presentation with her. And that worked really well. But I think the most valuable thing we got out of this small study was that it gave us an opportunity to see this disconnect between students working alone and in groups, and got us thinking about what that means, and definitely got us thinking about running a bigger statistically sound study on that topic. So although it was a very small project, it was a nice way to get started in empirical research and a great way to find a new question that probably would support a full-blown statistical study. So in case you're interested in what we did with our study, you'll see some sites there to the articles that we wrote. And if any of you have any questions about how to get started on something little like this, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Professor Cameron. And now let's just jump right back into Dr. Christensen's presentation. We think we have his audio troubles fixed, and we want to hear why statisticians are so charming.
Oh, that's just, I guess, obvious. But can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. So yeah, a couple reasons why you'd want to, why you'd like to work with a statistician. I hopefully ended with that, and as Lance said, so charming. But so why work with? Why would a statistician want to work with me? You might be asking. And actually, there's several good reasons. First of all, as I said before, statisticians have kind of this intellectual schizophrenia and are interested in a wide variety of questions, and often can be engaged on the interesting work that you do. Methodological development, kind of statistics theory, is kind of our day job, but really a lot of the work and development that goes on in a statistician's office is motivated by real-world problems, and so we're always looking for interesting and new challenges. And so this actually does help our work. And many academic statisticians are rewarded for collaborative work in addition to the kind of more basic mathematical statistical research. A lot are looking for opportunities to publish in applied areas in other fields. So anyway, my suggestion would be to pitch a research idea to a statistician, especially if you're talking with someone who's either pre-tenure and they're interested in getting involved in a lot more new projects, or a lot of universities have consulting centers, statistical consulting centers that can help you with your work. So this was mentioned a couple of times by Professors Boyle and Ingham, but involving a statistician early on can really change things. If you bring in a statistician late after you've gathered your data, what you'll find is that the statistician is really fills the role of cop, tells you what went wrong, what you shouldn't have done, perhaps, what types of things are not available now to you because of certain decisions you may have made in the way you gather the data or design the study. And that's not fun for anybody. That's kind of the killjoy role. If you bring in a statistician early, I think that you'll find that it really is a mutually beneficial and rewarding collaboration, one that can be enjoyable and challenging for both parties. I think in the collaborators that I've had outside of statistics, when we have this kind of healthy relationship early on, I find that I can push them on the areas that are supposed to be quote unquote their turf, the theory and the legal writing ideas, conversely, the collaborators I've worked with, people like Lance Long, have helped kind of push, what is it that we're trying to do on the statistical end, and that can be very very rewarding. So just a couple of points about inference. What does it mean to have a population and to make inferences? There are a couple of traditional ways of looking at a statistical study, and as I'll mention in a moment, not all studies are traditional, but observational studies usually involve starting with a population, and maybe we're interested in some parameter mu, that might be a mean that you're interested in for the population. We take a random sample, a small group from this population. We calculate some information about that sample, like a sample mean. That's what this X bar refers to, a sample mean. And then we're going to get to the point where we're at statistical inference. We're going to use that sample mean to make a decision about the population, the total population mean that we're interested in. So that's what we mean by formal statistical inference, taking information from a sample and making a decision about a population. In an experiment, the other kind of traditional method of gathering data, we take subjects that are gathered either by some random sample or because they're available subjects. We randomly assign to the subjects to one or two or more treatments and measure the responses, look at the difference in those responses, and then try to make a decision, make an inference, again, back to the phenomenon, the general phenomenon we're interested in, to say, is there an overall or general tendency for these two sorts of treatments to yield different responses? Well, these two sorts of studies, though, I think it's important that we recognize that with respect to choosing an experiment or choosing an observational study, the way that we gather our subjects or items for analysis and the way that the treatments are assigned are going to dramatically impact the kind of conclusions you can make. So on the right side of this table, we have treatments not assigned randomly, but maybe they just exist in the population. Maybe here I'm interested in comparing lawyers' writing with MBA's writing. I have not assigned them their career, and so this is an observational study, and I can't make statements like causality. And it's important that we try not to avoid that kind of language, that as if being a lawyer makes you write this way and being an MBA makes you write a different way. However, if the subjects have been randomly selected from the population of interest, this top row here with the yes on the top row, then we can at least make an inference to a population. We can say this is an observed difference in lawyers and MBAs, but we can't say that there's a causal relationship. So the holy grail is this top left corner. We love to have experiments where we've randomly assigned treatments, and it's great if the subjects have come from a random sample from some population of subjects we may be interested in. That's not always possible, and that's fine. We can still have useful information from many different studies, but we should recognize that we live in one of those 4 boxes or something like that, and we should tailor our conclusions accordingly. If your study's not so traditional, I'll kind of end with this and then wrap up with a conclusion here. If our study's not so traditional, and this is a lot of the kind of interesting work that's going on in legal writing and in law in general, it might not be quite so simple to decide how statistical inference applies to the study. So, for example, this study that Lance and I have been working on: do Supreme Court justices write differently in majority opinions versus dissents? Now, that's a very broad question, but we kind of tried to fine-tune that, and so that we could actually do some analysis. We used all of the opinions written during the first 2 years of the Roberts Court, and we're interested in a couple of different conclusions. Part of what we did is simply report what is the mean readability measure, readability being a quantitative measure of how easy it is to intellectually digest a document. So these things, there really isn't a need for p-values or confidence intervals, this language of statistical inference, because we're simply reporting an observed mean. And so in that case, you really don't need formal statistics. You can use charts and graphs and numbers. However, there's other facets of the study where we do need formal statistics. If we're interested in understanding the nature of the relationship between readability and, say, whether you're writing in the minority versus the majority, that's something where it might not be a traditional statistical inference in that we're sampling from some population and then making an inference about that population. But we are using the p-value or the statistical language, the probability, as a means for understanding and quantifying the plausibility of this observed relationship. That is it real or is it just spurious? So there's important questions to think about with regard to statistical inference and what is the population we're trying to make inference about. I'm going to skip this next slide and just share my thought here on this conclusion page. We need to think carefully about how subjects are being randomly drawn or randomly assigned treatments so that we can decide whether inferring about a population really makes sense in a study. And then this last statement, we really need to use the wisdom of those with experience in quantitative research, statisticians and others in a variety of areas when we're analyzing data and drawing inferences. I think that really strengthens the conclusions and the applicability of the research that you're doing. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the organizers.
Thank you, Dr. Christensen. He really is a charming statistician to work with. All right, these have been great presentations. I want to thank everyone. And let's, even though we're just a little bit over here, why don't we go ahead and let's just field a few questions here. And I will direct them. We've received several questions from the attendees, and I just want to direct a few to some of our panelists here. First of all, this one goes to Robin and or Joanne. In legal scholarship, it seems that novelty is very important. It reigns. And so is it really possible to make a meaningful contribution in law by replicating a study? And that's a question that was asked by Judy. So what do you think, Robin and Joanne?
You know, the words of the late Dr. Rita Dunn keep resounding in my head, which is there's value in replicating a study. So because I work so closely with her over the years, that I know that there is value in replicating a study. I have not precisely replicated a study. The studies I've been involved with have been paving new territory, but there are studies that I think would be very valuable to replicate. For instance, I was just reading studies performed by Leah Christensen, for example, where she studied the reading patterns of students at the high end of the GPA and low end, and those with ADD and those without ADD. And I believe in those studies she encouraged people to replicate them at different schools. I think we could use larger population bases and different schools to run those studies, and it would be great if people could do that. A lot of what I did involved learning styles, but it was a different nuance. For instance, the first study I did with Dr. Rita Dunn, we assessed the learning styles of students in a law school. That was the first time that had been empirically studied. The PLS was the first time a PLS was used in a law school. The CAP, that was the first time a CAP had been used in a law school. The study I did with Joanne, that was the first time that we had compared the learning styles of students at 3 law schools and so on and so forth. So a lot of the ground has been new ground, but a different nuance on maybe the same theme. What do you think, Joanne?
I would agree with that, and as I said, if you work with a different population, day students versus students in an evening program, you may find differences. Working with students in an urban setting or in a different region of the country, I think the replication, if you expand on the populations or the nature of the study, really contributes to a knowledge base. I mean, you really will be building just a strong common understanding of the dynamic you're studying. I'm an advocate of replicating good research that needs further study.
Thanks, Robin and Joanne. Hey, here's a good question. Joseph wants to know, how many subjects do you suggest in these kind of empirical studies? What do you need for valid results? Are we talking 100, 500, 1,000 students? In other words, how large must the sample be compared to the population in order to make valid inferences? Dr. Christensen, can you enlighten us?
Well, certainly. As it turns out, when you're planning a study, I'm going to sound like a one-trick pony, but when you're planning a study, it's good to involve a statistician early. The question of how many people to sample is actually an excellent question, and it's one that you can answer quantitatively, but it requires sitting down with the statistician and saying, here's some past studies here that gives us some notion of how much variability we might observe in the responses. So if you sit down with a statistician, they'll ask you questions like, how big of a difference do you expect to see when you compare the traditional media versus the new media approach you're using to teach your students? Maybe you're comparing these two. They'll say, what kind of difference are you hoping to see, and how much variability is there in the responses? And some of these questions are hard to answer, but with looking at some of the existing literature and kind of talking through what you expect to see in the phenomenon you're studying, you can actually put some pieces of this puzzle together and get an answer like, we should have at least 175 students in our study. So that the question of how many people do you sample to have a valid inference can vary dramatically depending on the phenomenon you're studying. So I know that's not an easy answer, but it's one with a fixed answer.
Yes, and it wasn't an easy answer when William told me that we needed twice as many opinions as we were currently analyzing in order to get the result that we sought. So, but it was by associating with him early that we were able to determine the correct number of opinions and briefs we had to use in our studies. Hey, following right up on that, Sarah asked the question, Dr. Christensen, do you suggest finding a statistician from your own institution or finding one from outside your institution? I guess I'd like both Dr. Christensen and Dr. Ingham to chime in on that.
Well, I'll just add a quick 2 bits. I think that if you can, I think the key is to find someone that you can develop a working relationship with. And if that works better because you know someone who's on the other coast of the United States, but you have a friendship or an acquaintanceship, that can work as well as having someone that's in the next building over. But if you don't have someone that you know that's quantitatively trained, I think just walking over cold and trying to meet some people that do social research or statistical research, that can work very well as well.
And I would agree with that. there may be times when you want to meet regularly or on the spur of the moment, and if it's someone you can walk across campus to meet there, it really will make your life easy.
Thank you. Hey, here's a question that's come up from a couple of attendees. Actually, both Bernadette and Roy are asking the inevitable question, and let's hear from all our presenters on this. What are the budgetary considerations here? Do you have to fund or hire these statisticians? How much does it cost to conduct a survey or gather data? What are your thoughts on the budgetary considerations here?
This is Robin. I can jump in. I was fortunate that my studies did not cost me very much money out of pocket. The one study with the PLS that I mentioned, where Linda Lay was the doctoral student, she did spend money, but on graphics for her materials. Although we could have photocopied them, she wanted them to look beautiful and to design them in a certain way. That was probably the biggest expense, because that ran into a few $1,000s to hire a graphics artist. By comparison, my statisticians have volunteered to work with me in agreement that we would co-publish, co-author together, in which case I didn't have to pay a statistician, or the statistician was part of the dissertation committee. Or when I did pay a statistician on the outside, it really didn't run me the kind of dollars that the graphics artist ran me, and I think that was because I got an academic discount. But I also think that you could perhaps help to fund it with your research scholarship money that might be offered from your school for the summer, or perhaps Allwood LWI research grants that are offered periodically. There are different sources of funding.
And I can say that, this is Catherine, by the way, my little empirical study didn't cost me anything except a little bit of my time, because I didn't get involved with statistics. Again, we were just doing that kind of for our own education and for anecdotal evidence. So it was free for us.
I would add that the study that Robin and I conducted across 3 law schools, many of the legal writing departments picked up a nominal expense for duplication, and there was a fee involved for purchase of a valid, reliable learning style instrument of about $1 a student. So the total budget was small. I mean, it wasn't expensive.
Thank you, presenters. Here's following right up on that question. Stephen asks, besides budgetary considerations, are there any other is there any other institutional resistance or problems that you've had to overcome when you're trying to do empirical work? Were institutions welcoming or skeptical of these empirical studies?
This is Robin. I think my institution has always been very supportive. My only caution is to give the IRB time that it will need to review your application. Nothing in an institution gets turned around very quickly, as you know. So I would just say give the IRB some time. You might have to go back and revise what you're planning to do. Your research plan may need some revision. You may need revisions on your releases. But ultimately, I think everybody is supportive. I think the IRB wants to see studies approved. I think your deans will want to see good studies conducted, because all of us have the goal of providing good pedagogy to our students.
The other point I might add is, as Robin said, providing the IRB sufficient time for review. My institution's very supportive, but there clearly is a concern when part of the study will take up classroom time. And you need to be very sensitive with respect to how time in the classroom will be spent.
And this is Robin. To piggyback on what Joanne just said, be careful when you're conducting studies, and your IRB will tell you this, that your study, participation in the study cannot affect course grades, so that students should not be penalized for participating in or opting out of a study, and students should have that option of opting out. When they do opt out, if this is a classroom study, then what you would do is give them an alternative assignment that's not part of the study. But the point is, time your study so that it's not close to, let's say, when their memo is due, so they're not resentful, and it can't be tied to a course grade.
Thank you, Robin and Joanne. Hey, William, this is a question I think that you can maybe help us for. I know we have some resources from Robin and Joanne on conducting studies, but Bernadette wants to know, is there a good book or an article that would give a lay person an overview of statistical empirical studies? What would you recommend to our attendees?
Well, I just sent a note actually to Kirsten. Maybe she'll post this. There is one book here.
William, I am going to post that too. So go ahead and talk about that, and I'm going to post that to the question and answer box right now.
Okay, excellent. So there's this book called Applied Linear Statistical Models by Kuttner and co-authors. It's a big, intimidating, you pick it up and you think it looks like the Old Testament or something like that. But it's very thorough. It covers a wide variety of topics and statistical methods. And I think if you actually open it up and get past the fact that it's so thick and scary looking, the writing is actually fairly straightforward. It's meant for the book is written, for example, like a graduate student who's not majoring in statistics, maybe in social science. Maybe this would be the course that they would take take a statistics course from. And so I think that's a nice book. I wouldn't say it's a terribly gentle way of starting in. I think perhaps if I were just getting involved in quantitative studies to begin with, I might read one of the papers by Professors Boyle and Ingham, or some of the other ones that have been mentioned today, just so you can get a sense of kind of, well, give me a case study. Sometimes case studies are the best way to get started, and then move to the textbook.
Thank you. Well, we've run a little bit over, and I think it's about time. Even though I know all of us, presenters, moderator, organizer, and attendees alike, we'd love to stay here all night. We do have to go home and eat and enjoy our evenings. But I would like to thank everyone for your participation. Our four fine panelists, thank you all. Special kudos to our organizer, Professor Kirsten Davis here at Stetson, and all of you for making this a very well-attended legal writing conference, virtual legal writing conference. Kirsten, I think, has actually added a lot of information in the chat boxes. This will be posted later on. You will be able to view this, as she said, on the Stetson site. If you want to see some of the PowerPoints, send me an email. I'll send them to you, and I'm sure anyone else here in our group that has presented would be happy to talk with you if you have any further questions. Thank you all very much, and we will now sign off, and we hope to see you again. Before we sign off, I want to just make a note. Look at this little last slide here, which thanks you for attending and asking you to join again. There is a little survey. It's just a couple of questions that helps us to maybe do these, improve on our virtual legal writing conferences in the future. So if you would just take a minute to fill out this quick survey before you leave the webinar, we would appreciate it. Once again, thank you from me and all of our conference presenters. Goodbye.